Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to be taking a close look at the latest news from TXN,
Texas Instruments.
Texas Instruments,
Yeah.
and their just released Q4 2024 earnings.
We've got a whole bunch of reports and analysis here.
And trust me, there are some really interesting twists and turns to unpack here.
Yeah.
So you can really understand what it all means.
It's this push and pull that's going on with the stock right now.
Yeah.
TXN beat expectations.
Which is always a good thing.
Always a good sign, but
Yeah.
the market seems hesitant.
It's not the usual reaction.
No.
You'd expect, after beating both EPS and revenue forecasts,
Exactly.
EPS came in at $1.30 compared to the $1.21 that analysts were predicting.
Yeah.
And revenue hit $4.01 billion,
That's right.
surpassing the expected $3.9 billion.
Uh-huh.
So what's making investors pause? What's going on
Well, I think the big thing is their guidance.
for Q1 2025?
Yeah.
Coming up
They're predicting a potential dip.
in revenue and EPS.
That's right.
And that's a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
You get this great dessert, but then you can't have dinner.
Right.
But at least there's a cherry on top.
That's true.
TXN also announced a 5% dividend increase.
That's right.
It's their 21st straight year
Yeah.
of dividend growth.
And that consistent dividend growth really shows their commitment to returning value to shareholders.
Yeah.
And it really suggests confidence in the long-term financial stability.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not just about the dividend itself. It's about
The viability.
the long-term viability.
Long-term.
Okay, let's go a little deeper.
Okay.
TXN saw 2% growth in their analog revenue, but their embedded processing segment.
18% hit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Can you explain to the listeners what those different segments represent?
Sure. So analog chips deal with continuous signals like sound or temperature,
Okay.
while embedded processing chips are more the brains behind specific tasks in devices.
So this sounds like
This is a big one because
Yeah.
it's the first time that the analog segment has grown
in 8 quarters.
in 8 quarters.
So that's really exciting.
That's a big deal.
But the embedded processing market might be facing some headwinds.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Okay, so outside the earnings report,
Okay.
let's talk about the elephant in the room,
Hmm.
or should I say the fab in Texas.
Yeah.
TXN secured $1.6 billion in funding through the GPS Act to build 3 new semiconductor fabs.
This is huge.
It's a big deal.
It's massive.
Those new fabs are going up in Texas and Utah, and they're expected to create about 2,000 direct jobs.
Yeah, and more importantly, it signals a big investment in their production capacity,
Yeah.
which, as the demand for semiconductors continues to rise,
Yeah.
could really be big for them.
It's a bold move,
It is.
especially considering that cautious guidance they issued for the next quarter.
That's true.
It seems like analysts are kind of having a tough time figuring out what to do with all of that.
Right, they don't know what to think.
The overall sentiment is a hold, but some analysts are forecasting double-digit upside
By 2025.
by 2025.
That's right.
So what's behind that
It's this short-term uncertainty,
with that Q1 guidance
versus the long-term potential growth.
from the fabs
Yes.
and also their focus
On industrial and automotive.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting situation where...
It's a real wait and see.
Yeah.
Okay, let's put on our technical hats for
Yeah.
a minute.
Yeah.
TXN closed at $180.57 on January 28th,
Oh.
down 3.454% for the day.
Oh.
It's currently trading below both its 50-day and 200-day moving averages.
So they're forming what traders call a
Death cross.
death cross,
Sounds kind of scary.
right?
So can you explain to the listeners what that means?
Yeah, so moving averages are basically these lines on a chart that track the stock's price over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the 50-day is the last 50 days. 200 is the last 200.
Got it.
And when that shorter term crosses below,
It can be a signal.
that the stock is
A
entering
downtrend.
a downtrend.
So should investors be worried?
Well, it's definitely something to watch,
Okay.
but it's not an automatic sell signal.
Okay, good.
But it is a red flag that a lot of traders are going to be watching very closely.
So it's not the only indicator we need to look at?
No.
What about some of the other ones?
So the RSI is neutral for TXN,
Okay.
and that measures the magnitude of recent price changes to evaluate overbought or oversold conditions.
So that means it's not overbought or oversold?
Not really, no.
Okay, that's good.
And then you have other indicators like the stochastic oscillator and the Williams percent R,
Yeah.
which are suggesting it's overbought.
Oh.
But then if you look at the trading volume on January 28th, it was higher than average.
Interesting.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
It's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the short term.
It really is.
Okay, but let's talk about what really matters.
Okay.
What does all this mean for someone who might be considering investing in TXN?
Sure. So there are a few approaches you might want to consider.
Okay.
The first is the long-term hold.
Okay.
And that's really appealing to people who are seeking stability and income.
Mm-hmm.
TXN has a good history of dividend growth.
Mm-hmm.
They have growth potential,
Uh-huh.
and they're making these strategic investments
With the fabs.
with the fabs.
So that makes sense for the slow and steady wins the race.
Right.
What about for investors who are a little more risk tolerant?
So for people with a higher risk appetite,
Uh-huh.
buying on the dips might be something you want to consider.
Like the classic buy low, sell high?
Yeah.
But what if you don't really want to dive in head first?
Then you might want to just wait and see.
Okay.
Because that Q1 2025 guidance is not super optimistic.
Yeah.
So some investors might want to wait for those results before they commit any capital.
So no matter what approach you take,
You have to understand the risks.
absolute.
Short-term volatility is possible with any stock.
Uh-huh.
And the semiconductor industry in particular is really cyclical.
Yeah.
So TXN's performance can be influenced by all these trends that are beyond their control.
Right.
So as always, it comes down to weighing the potential rewards against those risks
Yeah.
and making an informed decision that aligns with your investment goals and your tolerance for risk.
Absolutely.
And that's why we take the time to dig into all these details.
So listeners like you
Okay.
make informed decisions.
Awesome. Well, thanks for breaking all that down for us.
You got it. You know, it's fascinating how investor psychology plays into all of this.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like with this good news, bad news situation we have with TXN,
Yeah.
they beat earnings, but then they give this cautious guidance for the next quarter.
So it creates a lot of uncertainty.
Exactly. And that can make investors nervous.
It's like they're on an emotional roller coaster.
Let's circle back to the technical indicators we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned a death cross.
Yeah.
Sounds ominous.
It does sound scary, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But all it means is that the shorter term moving average,
The 50-day,
yeah, crosses below the longer term.
the 200-day.
Yeah.
And that's a bearish signal.
A lot of technical traders will see that and think that the stock is going to go down.
So should investors be worried?
Not always.
Okay.
It's important to look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
For example, if a stock is already oversold,
Uh-huh.
the death cross might not be as significant.
So it's not a guaranteed sell signal.
That's right.
What about the other indicators like the stochastic oscillator and the Williams %R? You said those were suggesting overbought conditions.
Yeah, and that can be a sign that the stock has risen too quickly.
And it might be due for a correction.
Yeah,
So it's another thing to watch out for.
right. But it's not always reliable.
Okay.
Sometimes stocks can stay overbought for a long time.
Especially if there's strong demand.
Exactly.
So technical analysis isn't perfect.
It's not an exact science.
It's more like a set of tools.
Yeah, that can help us get a better understanding of the market.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about TXN's strategic focus.
Okay.
They've been really emphasizing industrial and automotive markets lately.
Yeah, they're really focusing on those areas.
Why is that?
Well, those sectors are expected to grow a lot in the next few years.
So they're trying to position themselves to take advantage of that growth.
Exactly.
But of course, there are always risks.
Of course.
What are some of the key risks investors should be aware of when it comes to TXN?
Well, like we've been talking about, the semiconductor industry is very cyclical.
Uh-huh.
So when the economy slows down, PXN's business could suffer.
So investors need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, the semiconductor industry is very competitive.
A lot of companies are fighting for market share,
Yeah, and that can put pressure on TXN's profits.
so they need to stay ahead of the game.
They do.
And what about geopolitical risks?
Those are a big factor, too.
Yeah, we've seen how things like trade wars can disrupt the industry.
Uh-huh. And that can impact TXN's supply chain.
So there are a lot of factors to consider.
There are.
But overall, TXN seems like a company with a lot of potential.
I think so.
They're well positioned for growth, and they have a solid track record.
Yeah, and their commitment to dividend growth is appealing to a lot of investors.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they perform in the coming years,
It will be.
especially with all these new investments they're making.
Right, with the new fabs and everything.
It's a dynamic industry, so we'll have to stay tuned.
Definitely. Yeah, if they fall behind in technology or pricing, they could start losing market share.
And that would be a problem for sure. What other risks should investors be thinking about?
Geopolitical uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big one for the industry.
Because their supply chain is global.
Exactly.
So if there are any disruptions anywhere in the world,
It can impact their operations.
and that could be really tough for them to manage.
Definitely.
So geopolitical risks are a big concern. What about technology?
Yeah, that's another big one.
Is technological disruption a risk for TXN?
I think it's a risk for every company in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just constant evolution.
They can't afford to rest on their laurels?
No, they have to keep adapting.
So as we wrap up our discussion about the risks of investing in TXN,
Okay.
what are the key takeaways for investors?
The cyclical nature of the industry, the competition, the geopolitical risks, and the potential for technological disruption are all things investors need to consider.
Great points. So what are some questions that investors should ask themselves?
What's your investment horizon?
Okay,
Are you looking for short-term gains or long-term growth?
so if you're in it for the long haul, you don't need to worry as much about short-term volatility.
Exactly.
But if you're looking for a quick buck, you might want to be a little more cautious.
Yeah.
Okay, what else should investors be thinking about?
What's your risk tolerance? Are you comfortable with the ups and downs of a cyclical industry?
Because it can be a bumpy ride.
It can be.
What else?
What are your investment goals?
Okay.
Are you looking for income or growth?
Or a combination of both.
Exactly.
And TXN does have a pretty good track record of paying dividends.
They do.
So that's something to keep in mind.
It is.
Okay, what else?
How does TXN fit into your overall portfolio?
Diversification is important.
Very important.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
That's right.
And the final question,
Okay.
have you done your research?
Yeah, you have to do your own due diligence.
Don't just rely on what other people are saying.
That's right.
Do your own homework.
And make sure you understand the company and the industry.
Okay, great advice. So
Yeah.
where can investors go to learn more about TXN?
TXN's investor relations website is a great place to start.
Okay.
You can also find a lot of information on financial news websites like Bloomberg and Reuters.
Okay.
And investment banks also publish reports on TXN. And don't forget about online forums and communities.
Oh yeah, those can be a great resource.
They can be really helpful for getting different perspectives.
Great. So to wrap things up, what are your final thoughts on TXN?
I think they're a well-established company with a strong track record.
Yeah.
They're well-positioned for growth,
Ah,
and they consistently return value to shareholders.
absolutely. But as with any investment, there are risks.
Yes, that's important to remember.
So do your research and make sure TXN is a good fit for your portfolio.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on TXN. Is it a stock you would consider adding to your portfolio?
Yeah, let us know in the comments.
And be sure to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast. Share this episode with your friends and family, and leave us a rating. We'll be back next time with another insightful discussion about the world of investing.